Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you the full story of my hospitalization when I had my quadruple bypass open heart surgery on December 9, 2014. On December 1st, 2014, my wife and I went shopping at Food for Less on the corner of Francisquito Avenue and Hacienda Boulevard in La Habra, California, USA. It was here that I felt chest pains, not severe ones, but severe enough to make me feel uncomfortable and severe enough to make me fear that this could be the prelude to a strong heart attack. Belen usually takes about an hour or so to do her shopping in a supermarket. I was glad that on this night it took her only about 15 minutes to do her shopping. So once back in the car, the first thing I told my wife was, Mommy, I need you to take me to the ER. I'm having chest pains. So instead of going home, she drove straight to the ER. At the ER, I told the ER doctor what I felt. And then he had the usual tests made on me. Take my blood pressure, do an EKG at rest, take chest x-rays, and do lab work. After about 30 minutes, the ER doctor came back to me and said, Mr. Cortes, you need to be admitted for observation. Sometime later, the PCP, primary care physician of the hospital, came to me. Again, I told the PCP everything I felt. The PCP is the second doctor that the patient who is about to be admitted talks to. The PCP gets as much information from the patient regarding his ailment. He's also the doctor who decides what specialist the patient needs to help treat him. I was transferred to a hospital room. They have an abbreviation for the name of this room or rows of rooms on this floor. I don't remember what it is. DUO, UOD, but definitely not DUI. A couple of days later, I had an angiogram. It was here that my cardiologist found 4 of my coronary arteries that were more than 50% blocked. He decided right there and then, and told me so right there and then, that I needed to have quadruple bypass open heart surgery. I was operated on December 9, 2014. I stayed in the ICU for 3 days after my heart surgery. I don't remember if it was a day after or a couple of days after my heart surgery that two physical therapists came to me while I was still sleeping. One of them said, "Wake up, Mr. Cortes. We need you to stand back up on your feet and do a little walking with us." I was transferred to, surprisingly, the same room I stayed in before my heart surgery. In this hospital room, I continued my physical therapy. Two therapists came to me twice a day on weekdays and once a day on weekends. I was released on December 14, 2014. But before I was released, the PCP came to me and asked me, "Mr. Cortes, would you like to go home today?" Then I answered her, "If you think I'm well enough, yes, I certainly would like to go home today." Then she told me, "Yes, you're well enough to go home. There is just this little thing. You have a little water in your lungs, but don't worry about this." She told me, "This will go away." Since the first day after my release from the hospital, I never felt that I had regained my normal strength. I didn't feel well at all. In fact, I became weaker as each day passed by. I began to lose my appetite, so I couldn't eat as much food as I needed to. I also couldn't sleep well at night or even during the day. So lack of sleep and eating so little food contributed to my getting weaker every day. Also, from time to time, I had a hard time breathing. I was able to spend Christmas with our family. Just our 4 sons, 3 daughters-in-law, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. But I had to excuse myself in the middle of the party because I wasn't feeling well. I needed to lie down in bed. When I lay down in bed, I fell asleep. And when I woke up, everybody was gone. The party was over. 3 days after Christmas, December 28th, while I was sitting on the side of our bed in our bedroom, I suddenly felt an attack of shortness of breath. I could hardly breathe. I felt very weak. I couldn't stand up, let alone walk. I waited a minute or so to see if my breathing difficulties would go away. They didn't. In fact, they kept getting worse. So I asked our second son, Tony, to call 911. Almost immediately after he made this call, two paramedics were inside our bedroom. One of them asked me, Mr. Cortes, could you stand up and walk a few feet to that stretcher in the hallway? I told him I couldn't. They had to carry me. So with the help of a second paramedic, I was carried to the stretcher and then put in the ambulance. Inside the ambulance, a paramedic put an oxygen mask on my face. That made my breathing a little easier. At the ER, I told the ER doctor, what happened to me. And sometime later, the PCP of the hospital came to me, and I told him the same thing. I was transferred directly from ER to ICU. It was here in ICU that they found a considerable quantity of water in my lungs, which they later drained. Also, one or two doctors suspected that I had pneumonia, so I was given antibiotics. I spent 4 days in ICU, and these 4 days in ICU were the worst days I had during my 2 hospital confinements. I just lay there in ICU, often struggling with my breathing, not getting enough sleep, and not getting enough food, because every time I ate, they had to remove that oxygen mask from my face in order to get food into my mouth. But once that oxygen mask was removed from my face, my body oxygen dropped very fast to a low level. And at this low level, I felt very weak. I could hardly breathe. I felt like I was about to pass out. So I didn't have much time to eat, 5 minutes at the most. And I didn't want to feed myself because that took a long time. I didn't want to eat solid foods either for the same reason. Besides, chewing solid foods use up some of the little energy that was left. So I was spoon-fed liquid foods, sometimes by my nurse and sometimes by Belen when she was around. During these 4 days in ICU, I didn't see how I could possibly get well again. I didn't see how I could possibly regain my strength. I didn't see how I could possibly improve my condition. So there were moments during these first 4 days in ICU that I felt my life was slipping away, but never, not even for just a moment, did I ever think or feel that God was abandoning me. I knew He was right there beside my sick bed, quietly watching over me, like a mother watching over her very sick baby. There were moments during these first 4 days in ICU that I felt I was close to the end of my life, but never, not even for just a moment, did I ever lose my faith in the power of prayers and mass praying. I knew prayers were very powerful. I knew prayers, both my own and those of our many relatives and friends outside, could save my life. So I prayed and I prayed and I prayed like I'd never prayed before, until sometimes I fell asleep. On the evening of my 4th day in ICU, when I had a lot of visitors, both inside and outside my room, and while Belen and I were talking to each other, the ICU doctor came to us. He talked to Belen. I don't know why he didn't speak to me, the patient. He probably thought that I was only half awake and didn't want to talk to a half only awake patient. But I heard very clearly every word that he said to my wife. I heard him begin saying, Mrs. Cortes, your husband has been in ICU for 4 days, but I'm sad to say that we have seen little or no progress in his condition. I hate to tell you this, Mrs. Cortes, he continued, but we need to do something more drastic. We need to put your husband on a ventilator and see if his condition improves. When I heard those words, see if his condition improves, a dreadful question immediately surfaced in my mind. What if? What if? What if? But I didn't want to think about this, so I put this to the back of my mind. I heard the ICU doctor continue, but Mrs. Cortes, this is not a decision for me to make. This is not a decision for any doctor to make. It has to be the patient, your husband, who has to make this decision. I've seen your husband a couple of times before, and I see that he is well in control of his mental faculties. So it has to be your husband who has to make this decision. If he were mentally incapacitated, it would have to be either you or some other close member of the family who has to make this decision. Then he finished by saying, Mrs. Cortes, the ball is in your court. I need to know your husband's decision in the morning. After the doctor had left, my wife, almost in a panic, Daddy, ano bang dapat nating gawin? Ano ba ang gagawin natin? Then I calmly told her, Alan, a doctor, and his wife, Rowena, an experienced RN, are still out there. Go talk to them and seek their medical advice. They are the only two people we know who can give us sound medical advice. So go talk to them. And so the three of them, including our sons, talked. How long they talked and what they talked about, I had no idea at all at that time. While the group were talking, Rowena came to my bedside, knelt at my bedside, and whispered these words into my ear. Daddy, kung talaga pong hirap na kayong huminga, kung talaga pong hindi yun na kaya, magpalagay na po kayo sa ventilator. Ipagdarasal po namin kayo. And then she left. When everybody was gone, I knew that night that I had to make the most critical decision I ever had to in my whole life. I also knew that night that I could not endure another day of frequently struggling with my breathing, not getting enough sleep, eating so little food. I also knew that night that I had only one and only one option. Either have myself put on the ventilator or let my life slip away. So, pushed by Rowena's advice, I decided that night to have myself placed on the ventilator. Early the following morning, I called my nurse and asked her to tell the ICU doctor about my decision. I also asked her to call my wife and let her know about my decision and pass on this information to our 4 sons and my 2 brothers. My wife and Tony came to the ICU before I was placed on the ventilator. We talked for some time, then everything went black. I was now on a ventilator. Almost every morning while I was on the ventilator, Joey, one of our daughters-in-law, came to the ICU just to check if everything was going smoothly, that everything was going right. So for this, Joey, I'm so grateful to you. And here's the good news. Following Rowena's advice, my decision to be placed on a ventilator turned things around. I woke up one morning after 4 days and nights of hibernation while on the ventilator, feeling great, just great. I never felt this great before as I did that morning. I can't describe to you how good it felt to be breathing normally again. I also knew when I woke up that morning that I was on my way to recovery. From this point on, it would only be the respiratory, physical, and occupational therapist who would take over. I also knew that morning that my prayers and those of our many friends and relatives outside were heard and answered by God. So, for your prayers, I'm at a complete loss for words on how to thank every one of you, our family members, my two brothers, our other relatives, and our dear friends. I know some of you had masses said for me. I know some of you held novenas at home to petition Our Lady of Perpetual Help to pray to God to spare my life. I know that some of you said the rosary every night and included me in your prayers to Mama Mary to help me pull through my serious illness. I also know that there are many people out there whom we do not know and whom we are not likely to meet personally during my lifetime, who also prayed for me. These people, complete strangers, may be, number one, friends of our sons and my two brothers. I don't know all our sons and my two brothers' friends. Number two, these complete strangers may be friends or relatives of our friends and relatives. Number three, they may be friends or relatives of our friends and relatives, friends or relatives. So to all these complete strangers, thank you so much for your prayers. Through this video, you can see the face of the person you prayed for. It's too bad, however, that I cannot see the face of the complete strangers who also prayed for me. I was released from the hospital for the second time on January 17, 2014.
15.
Excuse me, January 17, 2015. Rowena, you may not know this, but those words that you whispered into my ear that night, I was battling shortness of breath, figuratively pushed me to that ventilator. I was afraid to go to that ventilator because I didn't know what would happen to me. Alan, a doctor, feared that there could be some complications. But those words, Rowena, were like you, grabbing me off my bed and putting me on the ventilator yourself and firmly but politely telling me, Daddy, dyan lang po kayo. Huwag po kayong alis dyan hanggat hindi kayo gumagaling. For your medical advice, Rowena, I'm at a complete loss for words on how to thank you. aside from your prayers, I am most grateful to you for your visits. Before I had my heart surgery, I had no idea at all of the great emotional impact that these visits could have on a patient lying seriously ill in a hospital bed. Those visits gave me the strength, the determination, and the willpower to get well as quickly as I possibly could. Seeing those so familiar faces and hearing those so familiar voices were like seeing and hearing my fans in a ring fight, like a Pacquiao fight in which I am Pacquiao's opponent. Cheer me on, keep fighting, keep slugging, keep punching, keep trying to knock that Pacquiao down, or better still, out, like what Juan Marquez did to him. Those visits also gave me that beautiful feeling of being in the company of people who really love me so much, who really like me so much, who really cared so much about me. People who really were eager to see me up and around again. And here's the most touching visit I ever had during my 2 hospital confinements. On New Year's Eve, just a few minutes before New Year, I suddenly heard a voice speak from behind my bed saying, "Happy New Year, Daddy." 1 or 2 seconds later, a second voice also said, "Happy New Year, Kuya Jake." The first voice was that of Belen's, and the second that of Luz's. Luz is Belen's brother's wife. In other words, the 2 are sisters-in-law. So, could you imagine anything more touching than to have your wife, accompanied by her sister-in-law, visit her sick husband in a hospital